And then people ask me, well, what am I doing in my investing right now? What has doing this podcast led to? Has it led to any deals? And what's my outlook on the market? So I will tell you that hosting this podcast has really been a blessing in that I've met several people who I've done deals with.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. Hello and welcome to episode 250. We have reached the quarter century mark here at the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. It's 250 episodes, and I am so grateful and thankful that we have made it this far. I want to thank you, the listeners, for sticking with the show and hopefully getting a lot of great information from it. I want to thank all of the great guests that we've had over the past 250 episodes. And I especially want to thank Clay Powell and the team at the Rental Property Owners Association for getting us here, especially Christina, who helps with the marketing and the social media for the show. And it's really paid off. The show has received such a great response that I thought I would just spend the 250th episode talking to you myself. We don't have a guest today. It's just going to be me, kind of sharing a little bit about the show, how we put it together, sharing some data with you, who's listening to it, how many people are listening to it, the technology I'm using, as well as kind of the philosophy and what I've learned hosting this show, which has really helped me in my real estate investing, and I'm going to share a little bit about that with you today too. So I'd like to start though with you, the audience, and I love getting feedback. And one of the best places to get feedback is on iTunes when people go to review and rate the show. I have several reviews, one positive, one negative, and I just want to read them and kind of respond to them. I'm going to start with MSU Kevin, who left a comment saying, solid content, professional and interesting. MSU Kevin says, this is the most well-rounded podcast in the real estate realm. It's a great balance for the beginner all the way to the pro. Brian does an amazing job with guest/topic selection. Thanks for providing real-world, no-hype material. And MSU Kevin, thank you for that comment. That is what I strive to do. I mean, that I am always, when we select our guests, and I'll tell you about our guest selection here in a moment. When I select our guests, the topic, I always strive to have you, the audience, in mind. What are you going to get maximum value for? Because I get guest requests. People ask me, how do you find your guests? Because we have so many great guests from all over the country and now all over the world as well. And the answer is they find me. I get a lot of solicitations from booking agents who have guests that they want to recommend to be on the show. And I always have to think, okay, what kind of guest is going to be right for the audience? Because sometimes it's obvious that this particular person is only wanting to be on the show so they can promote a product. Most of the time, I don't want that, unless it's like a product that I think where we can get into the subject of that product rather than just promoting that product itself. For example, when we talked about virtual assistants with Amy Ransdell, I really think virtual assistants are a great thing to add to your team. And even though I know she was promoting her own business that provides those virtual assistants, she was still able to provide a lot of great value, whether you use her product or her business or not. So I always keep that in mind. I want to make sure, they're not just going to promote, and I can't let them do that. Although we have to understand that whenever you listen to a podcast like the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, the guests are always promoting something. Whether it's their coaching, their training, their credibility, they're trying to raise money for their own deals. There's always that going on. So you always have to keep that in mind in the back of your head. I try to vet my guests. I do a little Google research on them just to make sure, okay, there's no negative comments out there about them. And sometimes I do find negative comments. So I'll just say, politely, I decline, or I would rather not have this guest on the show. I don't think it's a right fit for our audience. But I want to take into account you, the audience, your knowledge level, and I always proceed with the assumption that we have a whole spectrum of listeners, people who are just getting started, newbies who want to invest in real estate, all the way up to seasoned pros who might be listening to get specific information on this week's topic or guest who's appearing. So I always approach it with that in mind as well. I come from the film industry, the film marketing industry. Spent 20 years marketing major motion pictures and TV, some TV shows. And there's a fantastic editor named Michael Kahn who edits all of Steven Spielberg's films, and I got to hear him speak at one point. And every day when he goes in to work on editing a picture, he always approaches it with a Zen mindset. And what he means by Zen mindset is he forgets all of the baggage, all of the information from everything he's done the day before, or the week before, and he approaches the film that he's editing from zero, as if he's never seen it before, so that he can once again continue to shape it and form it into something that really works. And that's kind of how I approach the interviews at least that's how I try to approach the interviews that we do, which are really just friendly conversations. But I approach them as if I know nothing about the topic. Maybe I know a lot about the topic. Quite often I know nothing about the topic. So I'm learning along with you, the listener. And I think that hopefully that helps and that comes through, so that when you listen to this show, it's not just we're talking about something in general, but I like to dig into it even more on a granular level, so we understand the nuts and bolts of how it works. You say you do this, but how exactly do you do this? And I hope that comes through. And that's what I strive for. Sometimes I can get there, sometimes it doesn't quite work that way. But that is my philosophy. It's kind of a Zen philosophy when I start a conversation. I do very little research or preparation for each conversation that I have. I do write up the introduction, and I usually get that from the guests themselves or from their LinkedIn page. But that's kind of how I approach it. And I want to read to you another comment, this one negative, which I think is important to address as well. This is this is from Triple D 2244, and the headline is, "It's all advertising, 1 star. The majority are inspirational talks and third-party ads to get money of you." I assume that's out of you. And like I said, and I appreciate that feedback too, because when you do listen to a show like this, and I listen to some of the other shows that are in a similar vein, there is a lot of promotion, self-promotion, promotion for training, whatnot. But like I said, I try to get to the content too. I want to get to the nuts and bolts. I'm going to try to keep a guest from just selling, and I want to get to the place where they're educating as well. And I'll make that trade-off. I don't mind having guests come on the show and eventually saying, hey, go to my website and you can check out my product, you can download my book. I welcome that, and I think it helps get us better guests. Now, as far as any other types of advertising, we've had some great advertisers over the years. One of our biggest backers has been Green Property Management, and we promote them on every episode. We've also promoted our RCB Associates, Chad Creasy and his services, Icon Realty. I know I'm leaving some out here, but these advertisers actually pay to be on the show. And that helps generate a little bit of cash for the Rental Property Owners Association. And I do get a small cut of that. But I can tell you it's not like we're making a killing here off of the advertising. And I do limit the advertising. You listen to some shows and you can hear a promo, which is really just an advertisement spot. that goes on for 3-4 minutes. And I make sure you've got about a 10-second bumper at the beginning of the show where we mention the sponsor. You've got a 10-second bumper at the end of the show. And when I say bumper, it's just like something that comes before the show, something that comes at the end of the show. And then we've got 45 to 60-second spot somewhere before the 20-minute mark. And we have a rule on the show, and this is something Clay Powell and I discussed early on. We don't want it to be all advertising, because you do listen to some of those shows and it's just like way too much advertising. We want to focus on content. So we have a rule that we have no more than 2 advertisers at the same time, no more than 2 promotions at the same time, and we also don't have competing promotions. So that's I hope that answers your question. Yeah. So I'll accept that criticism that we do have a lot of I wouldn't say we have a lot of third-party ads, but we do have third-party ads. And when you say the majority are, and when Triple D 2244 says the majority are inspirational talks, I'm not quite sure how to take that, because yes, we do have guests who really get into mindset and are about inspiring, but we strive on the show to be more about the nuts and bolts. I don't want this to be a self-help show. I'm not here to correct your mindset. We do talk about it. We do talk about effective mindset, but I do think that some people have the right mindset and they're going to do well in this business, and I think some people just don't have the right mindset and they probably shouldn't be in this business. They should probably go do something else. So anyway, I hope that addresses that. I could go on with other feedback. Most of it's pretty positive, and I do appreciate it when people leave positive feedback or negative feedback too. And the most effective place to do that is iTunes. When you review or rate a show, 90 to 95% of our listeners come through iTunes. Although we did start recently doing YouTubes. So now, up until a year ago, I was only recording audio. Now I make it a habit to record the Zoom video as well, and you can find that on YouTube. So I want to share with you some of our, giving you a peek behind the curtain here. I want to share with you some of the data on this show, because I'm very proud of our listenership and how we've grown it over the past 5 years. And I've talked to a lot of people who have played around with the idea of starting their own podcast. And I encourage you. I think having a podcast it really helps, build credibility. Because I may not know anything about a topic, but when I have an expert on the show who does, well, it builds my credibility too. And being able to advocate on behalf of whatever it is that your why happens to be. In my case, the real reason I host this show is because I believe in the mission of the Rental Property Owners Association. I believe that as a business, or rental property ownership and landlording, however you look at it, it's a business it's an investment. And the Rental Property Owners Association helps us protect the integrity of our business by educating and training landlords, rental property owners, real estate investors in best practices, understanding the rules and laws that have to be followed, and helping to fight against that perception that is just infests other people, people who don't understand what we do. It infests their mind of like we're slumlords somehow. And I've always bristled against that perception. And the Rental Property Owners Association really, we're there. I'm part of it. I'm on the board. We're there to help fight against that perception through education, training. It's where landlords go to find success. And then the other part of that is that, it makes our business just a better business to be in when we're all working together, sharing best practices, sharing information like we do on the podcast, like we do in meetup groups, like we do through a lot of the information that the rental property shares, the Rental Property Owners Association shares. That is my why for hosting the podcast. And I bring that up because if you are thinking of doing your own podcast, I'm going to share with you kind of some of the things you should consider. And even if you're not thinking of doing it, you're going to get a glimpse behind the curtain here because I'm going to share some of our data with you. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you host a podcast, you have to have some sort of hosting server. And we use Libsyn. It's about $20 a month, and we're posting four to five episodes a month, each roughly 45 minutes to an hour each. By the way, I'm very proud of this. We reached over 1 million listens back in September. Right now we're up to 1,027,636 listens. My understanding is that a listen is the same as a download. Because some people download the show, some people just stream it. So technically, if you're streaming it, are you really downloading it? So what this really is over 1 million listens or downloads across all of the episodes, the 249 episodes that have been released so far, up till today, which is Friday, the 16th of October. And we average between 900 to 1,000 listens a day, which is pretty good. The average show, and I did a little Googling, and what I found is that the average podcast after 30 days has about 142 listens. That's the average show. So at 900 to 1,000 listens a day, and after about 30 days, an episode is going to have somewhere between 2,200 to 3,000 listens. And I think it depends on the topic and the time of year, but that probably puts us in the top 15% of podcasts. I want to show you some of the show stats, and we'll look and see what our popular episodes are. You can see that the most recent episode that came out was Sri Latha, episode 249. That came out on Monday. 1,631 people have already listened to it. The previous episode to that, episode 248, 2,000 people have listened to it. You go back to the 4 episodes ago, so it was about 30 days ago, 2,300 people have listened to it. One of the things I want to look at and share with you is just our top 3 episodes, and it's really hard to distinguish, well, what is it about these episodes that have driven so much listenership? But our number 1 episode at 5,637 listens is episode 210, which is no risk, no money down strategy that will put $5,000 to $10,000 in your bank account in 30 days using lease option strategies with Jim Adelot. I don't know if it's the way I worded the episode. We'll put $5,000 to $10,000 in your bank account in 30 days. Maybe that's a big motivator for people to listen to this. But that is our number 1 episode right now. So the second highest episode is episode 193, How He's Achieving His Goal of $50,000 Monthly Income with Nick Disney. Not looking at these top 2, I think when I get specific about how much people are making, that seems to attract more attention. So that's pretty interesting. So Nick Disney, over 5,562 people have actually listened to his show, 46 people just this month. Yeah, so I am actually seeing a real pattern here. So the number 3 top episode is episode 172, How He Grew from a 2-unit to 640 units, all in his own backyard with Jason Perro. And maybe when I get specific in the name of the episode, as far as numbers, that really seems to help. And that's an important thing that I've learned just in marketing myself or any of the projects or investment opportunities that I have, is the more specific you can be about numbers, the more motivating it is. Okay, so one of the things I love looking at is just where are our listeners located? And if I go back, so Libsyn, again, changed their method of calculating who's listening. back in 2017. So I can only go back as far as November 1st, 2017. But if we look at that, we can see where in the world are people listening from. And you can see, 740,000 of our listens were in the United States, 14,000 in Canada. We have listeners in Brazil. You look at South America, every country, even Bolivia, we had one listener. Paraguay, 4. Argentina, 48. Colombia, 37. Ecuador, 17. You look over here in South Africa, Guinea, we had one listener. Nigeria, 150. South Africa, 1,711. I mean, people are listening from all over the world. And I find that exciting and fascinating. 5,000 people, over 5,000 people in Australia. China, over 1,000 people have listened to the show. And by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can actually see the map that I'm looking at. I'm sharing the stats on YouTube here. India, we've had over 1,000 listens. Russia, 296 listens. Mongolia, 3 listens. Kazakhstan, 9 listens. Egypt, 15. You just go around. Norway, 155. I'm just fascinated by our listenership. Iceland, 24 people. Greenland, 0. So there are some places that we have not penetrated yet, but the fact that 296 people in Russia have listened to us, well, I love that. I mean, it shows you that real estate is such a powerful motivator and inspirational thing for people all around the world. And I feel grateful that I'm doing it here in the United States, where we have property rights and 1031 exchanges and laws that are favorable to real estate investing. I know other countries do too, but a lot of these countries that I just mentioned, you don't have those rights. So, thank you, people from out of this country who are listening to the show. We appreciate having you with us. So people ask me a lot, how much time do I spend on putting the show together? And the answer to that is, on average, 3 to 4 hours a week. And that includes preparing for a show by writing the introduction and the copy, actually recording the show by Zoom most often. 90 to 95% of the shows I'm just recording on Zoom with people all over the country. I feel very lucky sometimes that I can actually interview people in person, and I have a home studio where I do that. And when I do that, I record on a program called Audacity. It's a free audio recording and editing software that anybody can access. So if you are thinking of doing your own podcast, that's definitely a good resource to have. And then I put the show together. I don't do much editing other than cutting out a few of the ums and ahs at the beginning of people's answers or at the end of people's answers. I do a little bit additional editing on myself because I tend to hate the sound of my voice and some of the things that I say. So I do have to confess that I edit myself to make myself sound better quite often on the show. So there's the post-production, then there's just the logistics of outputting it, uploading it to Libsyn, and preparing it to be released. Christina at the RPOA office, she helps me with that. She'll make sure it gets posted to YouTube and all the social media channels, things like that. This is a great tip for people who want to do their own podcasts. A lot of times you listen to shows, and as one person speaks and another person speaks, the audio level goes up and down, and you have to crank up your volume to hear someone, and then the next person is way too loud. So I process my audio. There's a website I go to called auphonic.com, AUPHONIC, auphonic.com. And they cost us probably $50 to $100 a year. But what they do is they process the audio to get it ready for you, the listener, so that you don't have to keep riding the volume levels as you listen to the show. And it evens out. It brings everyone's volume up to the same level. And that really helps make a difference. It helps it make it sound more professional and broadcast ready, because I want this show to sound as good as possible. I know sometimes there are technical difficulties with Zoom. and you get that electronic dropout. But I do strive to, make sure we're using good microphones, we're using good audio techniques, so that when you listen to it, it sounds as good as it possibly can. One of the mistakes I made the first year in scheduling guests was trying to do it by email and saying, okay, well, here's some dates that we can do it. Here's some time slots. You go ahead and pick one. And inevitably, I'd have a guest. I'd send that out to multiple people, and they'd all come back with the same time. And I'd have to say, no, that's not going to work. Let's do this. Well, one of the best tools I use now is Calendly.com, Calendly.com, and it integrates well with Google and Zoom. And basically, all I have to do now is put up, select the days and the times that I'm available, and send the Calendly link to the potential guests and let them choose from that calendar. And it automates everything, makes sure that people don't schedule at the same day or time, puts a little buffer in between. So I've got at least a half hour between when I finish one conversation and start another. It's made a big difference. And whether you're using it to host a podcast and schedule your guests, or just schedule lunches with people, I'd really recommend that as a tool. Another question I get quite often from my guests is, why do I have these movie posters behind me? What's the significance of them? And for those of you who are listening to this, you can't see it, but I have on my left a poster for the movie Fearless, which is a Jeff Bridges movie from back in the 80s, where he's in a plane crash and he's one of the survivors. Because he survived this very violent, deadly plane crash, he now feels he's invincible. And in fact, he's fearless. He has no fear of death. And I love that movie. And I think it, just as far as like teaching us something about life and death and all those things, it's a movie that really speaks to me. And if you haven't checked it out or haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend it. Great performance by Jeff Bridges. And the other movie, Remember the Titans, over my right shoulder, that is a movie that I worked on the movie trailer for. So I, back in the day when I'd lived in Los Angeles, and I worked for a company, at the time it was called CMP West Film and Design. I worked for the client at Disney as an editor on this trailer. Obviously, when you put a trailer together, there's a whole team involved, and I was lucky to be one of the team members making this trailer. It's on my demo reel, and it's also one of my favorite movies. I mean, Denzel Washington, great football story. I'm not a big football fan, but I love football movies for some reason, and I just think it's a perfect movie. I was proud to be part of it. So that's why I have the movie posters behind me. They give me inspiration. Plus, it doesn't hurt to have Denzel Washington looking over my shoulder when I'm doing this podcast. So favorite episodes. People ask me, well, what are some of my favorite episodes? And a lot of times I really love every episode in its own way. I mean, if I feel that I've done my job as far as getting a good conversation going, that's very gratifying. There are some people who I have gone after to try to talk with, and I should probably do this more often. But I read a book called Burn Zones, which is a book by George P. Newberry, and I just loved that book, and I highly recommend it. It's called Burn Zones. It's a bike racing term, and he applies it to real estate as well. But he tells just this great epic story of his rise and downfall as a real estate investor, and a real cautionary tale for people, especially in multifamily. And I was lucky enough to get him to agree to be on the show. I hunted him down and found him on Facebook and reached out to him. So I was real excited about that episode. I'll tell you, though, I've got an episode coming out next week for Halloween that I am just excited beyond belief about. 3 years ago, we did a Halloween episode, and it came about because I like to try different things for this podcast. I don't want it to just kind of fall into a rut. So 3 years ago, I would end my conversations with my guests by just saying, hey, do you have any haunted house stories that you want to share? And some of them did. Gary Hall and Steve DeCoster and a couple other people I had interviewed told me some really good stories. And we did a Halloween episode 3 years ago that I was very excited about. And these were true ghost stories. And this year I am doing it again, only this time I reached out to a retired reverend who is a ghost hunter. That's not what he would call himself. He's more like a paranormal researcher. And he grew up in a haunted house. His name is Reverend Gerald Hunter. You can look him up on Amazon. He's written 3 books on haunted houses in Michigan and the Midwest. And he came over to my home studio. We actually recorded this outside for social distancing purposes, but he tells some fantastic stories that I think are just going to blow your mind. And whether you believe in ghosts or haunted houses or not, he's the real deal. So I'm excited about that. That episode comes out next week. It's the Monday before Halloween. And I am really excited about it. I'm putting my editing chops together to make it as good as possible. And it's probably going to be a 2-parter because during our conversation, he and his research assistants, he came with his team, they invited me to go to a haunted house with them, like a real live haunted house in Bay City, Michigan, in the historic district. And I jumped at that chance, and the experience that we had at that haunted house was very puzzling. I'm not sure what to make of it. I won't give you too much information because I want you to listen to the episode, but it's as notable for what did not happen as what did happen. It's peripherally about real estate because we're talking about haunted houses and real estate. And, Reverend Hunter talks about how when people do rehab projects, that sometimes stirs up ghosts. And, like I said, whether you believe in it or not, it's going to be a fun, fascinating episode. And then people ask me, well, what am I doing in my investing right now? What has doing this podcast led to? Has it led to any deals? And what's my outlook on the market? So I will tell you that hosting this podcast has really been a blessing in that I've met several people who I've done deals with. One who I've talked about he was a guest on the show, Gene Chandler. He was on, like 3 years ago now, and he talked about investing in notes, performing and non-performing notes. And I called him up after that episode and said, hey, let's talk a little bit more. I might want to invest with you. And we have acquired well over 150 assets since then. These are paper assets, performing and non-performing notes. I have not done this episode yet, but one of the episodes that I hope to do in 2021 is with another partner of mine, Tim Puffer, who I met doing this podcast. He reached out to me because he was a fan of the show. We ended up buying a self-storage facility together in DeWitt, Michigan. And that has been a phenomenal experience, which led to a couple other investments that have really paid off. And we'll do an episode in 2021. Yeah, and then I've also been able to meet investors all over the country. I joined a mastermind group, a national mastermind group. It's Rod Cleef's Multifamily Boardroom. I was one of the early members. And Rod invited me because I was an early guest on his show. He was an early guest on my show. Rod's show is Lifetime Cash Flow with Rod Cleef. And that's been a real beneficial relationship too. I've learned a lot from the people in that mastermind group and really upped my game as an investor and someone who raises funds from accredited investors. So what do I see for the future of real estate investing? Are we heading into a recession as some people believe? We're kind of in a recession right now. How quickly are we going to get out of it? I'm not an economist. I love listening to economists and getting their perspective. But I can tell you that my takeaway from what's been happening is that there are asset classes that are suffering now and are going to suffer for quite some time. Office is depending on the type of tenants you have, not so hot right now. Definitely retail, shopping malls, and anything where people actually have to go into a store. That is suffering right now. Movie theaters, unfortunately, are feeling a lot of pain because people are afraid to go back to the movies. So retail, senior housing, that will come back from what I have been hearing from economists, but it's definitely suffering right now because people are afraid to put their mom or dad into a senior living facility. The bright spots, though, are luckily assets that I'm invested in, self-storage. Our self-storage facility, we were adding 15,000 square foot to our self-storage facility right during the pandemic, right during the shutdown back in March. We were finally able to open in June, 15,000 new square foot, and we've been able to lease it up very, very quickly. We were aggressive on lease up, but we're at 91% occupancy across the board at this point in October, which is very, very good as far as getting 15,000 square foot of self-storage space leased up that quickly. So I think self-storage is strong, and it should remain strong. Multifamily, I think you're definitely seeing a dip in occupancy, a dip in rent rates and rent increases. But if you look at the projections of the need for housing and the lack of affordable housing, multifamily, single-family, multifamily apartments should remain strong because the demand is going to be there no matter what. Because no matter how technology comes along to interrupt and disrupt, people still need a place to live. That's one of the things that I am focusing on right now, because we actually just this week closed on a property. For those of you who are in Grand Rapids, we just bought the old YMCA building, which is located at 900 West Leonard. And we're excited about this because, first of all, this is an obsolete building, which was built as a YMCA. So we looked at it in the perspective of, well, can we adaptively reuse this building? What could we do with it? And there are some things, but we've decided the highest and best use of this location is to tear down the existing building and develop apartment buildings. So I am working with a team, and I'm sure I'll be sharing more about that with you in 2021. But I'm working with a team. We have a developer on our team, a construction company on our team, and we're putting together plans. We're in the initial stages of putting together plans and pro forma-ing out to make sure the numbers work, and then eventually put financing on it of up to 120 apartment units right on Leonard Street. And that's an exciting project. And I'm looking forward to getting into that because that will be the first true development deal that I've done. And I do believe strongly that the need for housing is there, and it's only going to increase as time goes on. In fact, there was a study recently in Grand Rapids that we need at least 5,000 more units in Grand Rapids over the next 5 years. And even over the past 5 years, we didn't come close to adding that many units. So the demand is there. The demand is projected to be there. And we're looking closely at these market studies to make sure that we're putting the right mix in there. So that's a little bit about what I've been up to. My multifamily is my bread and butter. That has held up very well during the coronavirus pandemic. Our delinquency rate did not really increase, and I credit that to my property management company, Green Property Management, who communicated with our residents, helped them to understand that they need to pay their rent, and if they were having problems, to help them figure out, well, how can they access some of the public funds that are available to help pay their rent. So I think communication was key there in keeping our delinquency rate, people who weren't paying rent, from getting too high. And in fact, our delinquency rate actually improved over the past 4 months. So I think that kind of covers all of the things I wanted to talk about, the questions that I received. I'm very honored to host this show, and I want to thank those of you who listen to this show for being part of our team. I hope you are learning things from this show. I know I certainly am, and I will continue to find the best guests and ask them the best questions. I want to make sure that we're all getting something out of these conversations that help us as investors and rental property owners. And I just want to again thank the RPOA, the Rental Property Owners Association. Without their participation and involvement and backing of the show, we would not have nearly as many listeners. So that's very important. Clay Powell, again, and the staff at the Rental Property Owners Association, they do a fantastic job. And I would encourage you, if you're looking to be more professional in your investing, check them out, rpoaonline.org. There's a lot of great resources there. You can look at some of the classes that they have to offer online. My class is up there on advanced financial analysis. You can see how I run my numbers when I'm looking at an apartment complex. And that's it. Once again, I just want to say thank you. It's been an honor spending this time with you and sharing the conversations that I get to have with all these great guests with you. Thank you very much. You guys have a great week, and check out next week's Haunted House episode. It's going to be fantastic. I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.